So welcome everyone to this panel discussion on cooperation in Wales, where we're looking at accessing resources and routes to market through cooperation. So this has been the result of actually quite a long process of different projects that have led one on from the other, of exploring cooperatives and cooperation in Wales. And the latest iteration of that was a collaboration between Sustainable Places Research Institute, the Land Workers Alliance and the Seed Sovereignty Programme, looking at supporting small-scale horticulture and arable farmers in Wales to share resources and machinery and infrastructure and look at how connections could be made. So we've brought together 4 amazing speakers and to show you different examples of cooperation at different levels within Wales. And really, this is based on our fundamental belief that the only hope that we have to create sustainable and resilient local food systems is through cooperation. And cooperation is also a direct challenge to capitalism, which is based on promotes competition. And obviously, we have back in our history more cooperative models of agriculture that are seen elsewhere in the world. But what's quite interesting in Wales is we found that those memories of cooperation, of farms working together at a local level, harvesting each other's produce together, is still within living memory in some parts of Wales. And we can really draw on that history. And there is quite a rich history of cooperation and cooperatives in Wales. So we're trying to see what it takes to bring back that culture of cooperation and also look at some of the main challenges to that in Wales. So I'm not going to go on too long because we've got a lot to get through. I'm going to start by handing over to Tony Little, who's going to explain a bit more about the project that we've been on. So Tony has been involved in organic and sustainable agriculture for over 20 years. He currently works for the Land Workers Alliance, helping to build resilient and local food systems across the UK. Okay, off you go, Tony.
Lovely, thank you, Alice. And hopefully I'm going to share my screen and it's all going to work perfectly. Is that all right?
All good.
That's perfect, great. Yes, thank you so much. I was going to start really by expanding on what Alice said there about cooperation being important. And actually I'm going to frame it as a strategic necessity. And I think if we are ambitious for local and resilient food systems, and just by being here, I think we all are, it's really important. And I just want to start by setting out what the Land Workers Alliance sees as the targets or the vision for local food systems. So ultimately, we want to see that the local short supply chain equitable food systems based on agroecological systems are the dominant model in the UK in the long term. And as a sort of stepping stone to that, what we would like to see is independent local food businesses having a 25% share of the market by 2030. Now, however you measure that, that's an awful lot of people. If we simply look at proportion by the population of the UK, even by 2030, we're looking at feeding something like 20 million people. And that is just simply not possible without a high degree of cooperation. If we take transport and logistics as the most obvious example, individual businesses running individual vans and transport systems to feed 20 million people, it's simply not possible. It's certainly not desirable in terms of carbon, economics and times. Essentially, if we're going to get anywhere near this, then cooperation is absolutely essential. So when we're talking about sharing resources, what do we mean? Well, I think more or less everything, from land to labour. I've just spoken about transport and logistics, but really what we've been focusing on in this project, and what I want to focus on for the rest of this talk really, is sharing production equipment, processing facilities and storage. And the key thing here is appropriately scaled machinery and equipment. There are, of course, plenty of facilities for larger scale production, but if you need a machine that will dry 5 or 6 tons of grain as opposed to a machine that needs a minimum of 20. Getting access to those sorts of machines is a real challenge, and one that we really do have to crack if we're going to get anywhere near where we want to be. So what's the answer? I don't have it. I certainly don't have the answer to all the questions. I'm pretty sure there isn't a single answer. What I will do is just outline the approach that we have taken to accessing a particular, or solving a particular problem in a particular situation. So the circumstance here is that the increasing demand for ancient cereals and heritage varieties from artisan bakers is something that's really developing in Wales, and that provides quite a significant opportunity for local producers. But there's a problem, and that problem is that it's very difficult for small-scale producers to get access to, as I say, the right scale of dryers, but also grain cleaners, dehullers, particularly if we're talking about oats and ancient cereals. That's a real barrier. Storage facilities, we're losing a lot of grain because of insufficient quality of storage. So these are some real problems. These are the problems that we can hopefully tackle through cooperation. So how have we gone about it? We've done a survey and run some workshops to get a handle on what the current production of ancient cereals is and what the demand is and what it might be in the future. So we're looking ahead, in this case 3 or 4 years, to try and get a system that's fit for purpose into the future. We've essentially done an inventory of small scale growing facilities, what's available now and where is it. We've taken a step back and looked at that and identified the gaps, both in terms of geography and also the types of machinery. And using that information, and this is the next step that we're just moving on to now, is to start building a case for investment. And having done that, we then need to think about these, establish the basis for resource sharing. So how does it work? Where does the machines live? Who's responsible for maintaining them? You know, who does the coordination? All of those sorts of things. So we have, over the last couple of months, been doing that. What have we found? Found that most people are confident that we are looking at an increase in demand for grain of something like 25% over 3 years, and possibly more in some particular grains. As I've said, we've confirmed really that access to processing facilities is one of the major barriers. That's one of the things that's really stopping producers stepping forward and scaling up production to meet the demand that we know is there. And we do have some quite significant recent investment in small-scale equipment based on the Gower. That's Chris, who you'll hear from shortly. So we do have some kit around. It's just focused on the right in the south of the country. So stepping back from that, I think we can. It's fairly clear that we need at least one hub somewhere in mid Wales and possibly around Aberystwyth, and that hub will be a place where machinery is stored and accessible by local producers. It could be essentially a depot for bringing together transport and sharing logistics. It'd be essentially a centre that can solve some of the problems that we've been talking about. And that's partly for local producers in mid Wales to use, but also, as I was alluding to earlier, so that we can actually link effectively with Chris down on the Gower. I'm quite sure that Chris doesn't want to receive 20 small deliveries of grain on the farm for processing. We need a place where we can bring together that produce, link up the transport and send it down in one efficient lot. So that's, yeah, I think that there are certainly opportunities for farmers to work together, but I'm also interested in linking together different scales of operations. So very small grain producers can perhaps work with larger grain producers to take advantage of the opportunities for economies of scale. So what I hope I've done is just outline some of the problems, some of the opportunities, and put on the table an approach towards tackling some of those issues. So thank you, Alice. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks a lot, Tony. And you could see in Tony's slides some photos from the tour that we did as this collaboration between Sustainable Places, the Seed Sovereignty Programme and Landworks Alliance. And we had events to try and bring people together, looking at cooperation and mapping out things in South Wales, Mid Wales and North Wales. So we were hosted in South Wales by Chris, and I'm going to introduce him in a moment. And then in Mid Wales, we heard from Anne, who we're going to hear from later, and the network, Seed Network that Gerald is in. So it's really nice to see everyone here, even if in a virtual context, and hear how things have been going. So next up we have Chris Harry Thomas, and Chris manages Paverland Farm in the Gower, which is in South Wales. And he's taken the business on a journey from a traditional Welsh arable farm to a more sustainable family business, which creates natural local food and animal products. So his focus is on exploring how cooperation and sharing resources can benefit both Paverland Farm, as well as the wider local food economy and other smaller producers nearby. So I'll just hand over to you now, Chris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is where the dinosaur comes. I'm going to try and link in my shared screen. So don't be too desperate if this thing disappears completely. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll start nattering over the top, if I may. Basically, we farm in the Gower, and the farm has been traditionally an inorganic farm growing nearly all cereals. And I've spent most of my time abroad doing precision farm consultancy. But with the advent of COVID and sustaining the farm, we changed the farm back into a mixed farm system. So we've changed the whole thing with it aimed at being local supply, regional supply, and adding a range of products that we could develop and taking that further into retail outlets so we could police the margin. On this journey, this regenerative journey, which we're starting now, it's obviously getting everything done within a risk factor where we can allow for time to change. And I'm still hoping the Welsh Government will give us some help in the period of acclimatizing transition to organic. But in the meantime, we've opened up a livestock operation. You can see the cows sitting here on the cliff. The cliff, these are all pasture fed. They are cattle that we acquired as a complete herd, and then we've added to, but they are living on the cliff, and for that they're doing the work with NRW and sustaining the cliff and controlling basically the gorse and the bracken to get back to more varied species that we are lucky to have on the cliff. So these cattle here, and the idea is then with this and with NRW's help, they will then be slaughtered locally 2 miles away. They are sold in sides to restaurants. We don't do any butchery. They literally go after 4 or 5 weeks of hanging. They are then going straight to the restaurant for them to utilize the whole beast. The next thing, if I can move on to, is we've introduced vegetables and fruit. Alice, if you could move on to the next one for me.
Yep. I just want to check, are you getting that full screen? Is that all okay?
That's fine for me.
Yep, great, cool.
And basically what we started with the vegetables, we took 20 odd acres, and this is going through organic at the moment, conversion transition. So these are all grown without chemicals and without inorganic fertilizers. And we've ranged, we started a box scheme. We're supplying restaurants and and within that scheme and shops, but we're doing it all. We've just sold 47,000 pumpkins that have gone to pumpkin parks. We've also got another 8 acres of pumpkins that we're harvesting now for seeds. So we can actually do green seeds and we can do pumpkin oil. But the whole idea of this is to grow this into a sustainable business for local supply. We've also added into that 2 polytunnels, which are going up at the moment, to be able to give us obviously help for our propagation and also to be able to grow crops right the way through the winter. We're still harvesting 11 crops at the moment, and this scale we will take up to 35 acres next year within the scheme. So I'm going to gallop through the rest of this now. So that's the restaurant side done and all the vegetable side. The next one, if you would mind, Alice, is basically the crops that we've got. So we're growing a lot of sunflowers. We were one of the first working with the National Trust to grow these. These are on the National Trust ground looking over Worm's Head. So they have been a tremendous success, and we also grow some at home that we harvest, and that will end up into bird food and also beef crushing within the systems that we use. Within the cereals whole thing, and with the oats, which will come up in a minute, what we're looking to do is to take these products and to handle them through. That's a fairly dodgy looking couple of oats. I'm not quite sure why that's in the middle, but never mind. So basically what we're doing with all this is we're looking this for human consumption. So we get close to retail, where we're doing our own porridge, our own oat milk, and an oat milk ice cream. And the next thing is we're going to be growing, which you can stick with it as it is, on the growing and combining of wheats. We're changing our wheat production now to more traditional wheats, which we will then take to flour and process for flour. And this is obviously supplying for bakeries and other specialist needs. I will move on to the whole cooperation in a minute. And the next thing is really the cooperation. So if you could go back one slightly, thank you. The sharing and sourcing of vegetable equipment is being quite an interesting one. The last big cultivator we bought for the farm was £35,000, and then we bought one for the vegetable unit at £120. So we've been using quite a lot of small equipment, secondhand equipment, which has been quite reasonable to source. And now we're lending that to various people, and it's open for people to share that kit with us to actually take this thing through forward. The maintenance, we're lucky we have quite a good workshop, so we can maintain and repair just about everything. But obviously the whole thing is for us is to move this stuff into cooperation so that we can share this and also borrow stuff the other way. On the grain side, as Tony mentioned, we've now put in a small batch dryer. We have a big dryer that does 60 ton at a time, but we've now put a small batch dryer that does half a ton to 8 ton in batches, which allows us to do lots of different grains. We've now bought a dehuller, which is being fitted in about a month's time, a cleaner and a grader. And then we have a bagger and a weighbridge that we can use for ourselves, but also it is open to all other people, as Tony was saying. We just need to try and get the logistics right so they can come in sort of justifiable volume from various growers to actually make the system work. And that is happily available to everybody. We also have set up a transport side, so we will be able to pick up collated bulk pickups, if you like, in various sizes, so we can then process it at home. One of the things we're going to ask, though, is that people, although we can collect everything, that'll actually help us process it to keep the costs down. So where we need the help on the farm, that the farm could actually swap that or do something in terms of a labor change. I'm open to all sorts of suggestions. On the top of that, we're offering the farm basically as a base. We're looking for new partners that we can offer land to or facilities to add into our system and share some of the costs. We have a local gin company joining us, and they're going to be doing their gin, and we'll supply botanicals, fennel and coriander, as well as the premises. We've got a local flower grower considering coming to work with us and using the land, because they could link into our delivery and also into our customer base, who are very keen to have the flower links in. We're looking at other vegetable growers supplying us with fruit and vegetables, so we can utilize that. We're working with a partner actually to develop a whole pile of fresh soups. So we'll be able to take other products in to develop those fresh soups, which will change weekly, 2 weekly, whatever it needs. We're also interested in the grains that come for cleaning and dressing and sorting, in buying those so we can process that. We are setting up our own bakery fairly shortly, which will be processing sourdough within the wheats and stuff that we'll be producing here, and some barley flour. And again, we've gone slightly the other way. We've got our markets first, and then we're going back to fill that demand rather than looking for a market. We're also buying and looking for partners for grass crops where we can share and work this between us, because we want to add more organic meadow pasture into the product. The machine you can see on the screen at the moment is a machine that we've done to process our straw, hay and haylage, so that we can actually process this into a value added. And the bags on the right of the screen are the bags that we pack, and those are haylage ones at the moment. So this machine was commissioned just before Christmas, and it's on test runs at the moment But the idea is that we can add value to the farm, but we can't produce enough product on the farm. So we reckon our production will only be 10–15%. So we're looking for cooperation with other farmers nearby to produce more Welsh product to link into the system within it, and especially organic meadow grass. The challenges I'm going to just touch on, they have been mind-blowing and still continue to be so. Half the thing is we're a big arable farm, and then suddenly we are not allowed to use sprayers, or we're working sprayers out and the fertilizer hoppers out of what we're doing. So it's a big mind change that you can't tip chemical in the middle of something and go and annihilate all your weeds. So that has been a big change, and we're having to learn new techniques, new cultivation systems. So it has been a shock, and a shock for the guys and girls on the farm, where suddenly we've gone from one person and we're now running about 10 and growing at a horrible rate of knots. But they're all local jobs, and that's all building within the staff. The whole skill set of the farm is changing. That's been quite interesting to see. We're in this, and according to my main guy on the farm, we're going backwards, because the things that he thought we'd buried, the small tractors and things, we're going back that way, and he starts rudely thinking we should be using the small tractors as tractor weight for his main tractor. But at the end of the day, it is quite a very exciting journey on that. We've had problems finding staff and continue to have trouble finding staff, and that's going to be a big challenge for us going forward. We're trying to cover all our production without waste, so that we can actually convert it, hopefully, if there's any excess, into a food product like soup or bird food or whatever it may be. And for the Halloween, for past pumpkins this year, we've grown a lot for Halloween, but also we bought a seed extractor from China that arrived a year late, so we can extract the seeds and use that for oil and for pumpkin seeds to sell in packets.
Can I ask you to round up now, Chris?
Yeah, I'm just about at the end, actually. So in terms of the whole of this thing through, we've added transportation, if you want to move on to the next picture, Alice. And basically, so we would be able to move all our products with vans or trucks or large lorries. And this whole thing has brought a whole pile of change within it. But really, we need to add people in to our process through sharing and partners. And so I'd like to apologize for the gallop through everything, and I'll leave now and leave in peace to grab some questions maybe at the end. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot for that, Chris. And when we visited Chris's farm, everyone was really inspired and quite impressed and excited about a lot of the machinery that was there. And I think looking at this model of having a kind of hub where, as a larger scale operation, Chris has the capacity to store and get this kind of machinery. So how can that benefit other smaller producers nearby in a network and feed into reaching more like larger markets? So it was really great to see what Chris was doing, and yeah, quite amazing to see the scale of the machinery and all of the different enterprises that you're starting. So next up, we've got Gerald Miles, and Gerald has farmed at Caerys in Pembrokeshire, which is southwest Wales, with his family for over 50 years. The farm is a mixed organic farm and grows heritage grain crops, vegetables, and Welsh black suckler beef herd and pigs. And it was the first CSA in Wales. So he's going to be speaking to us about rediscovering ancient grains and how cooperation with machinery and seed saving can support this in Wales.
Happy New Year to you all. It's a shame that we're sharing a screen instead of being in Oxford and really seeing each other in this time of COVID. I'd like to introduce you to my farm. It's a coastal farm, family farm. I'm the second generation on this farm, and my son is farming it now. We have a mixed farm, coastal farm. We've got a suckler Welsh black herd. We've got a CSA on the farm, and as well, we grow ancient grains. And as possibly most of you know, Black Supreme, black oats, it took me about 20 years to find this variety, which my father and my grandfather used to grow. My quest for ancient grains has been quite a long journey, but my belief in them is strong, that drives me to this. I think they are the answer to better food, better bread locally, and for climate change, because the resilience of the grains and the crops are far better than modern varieties today. We also formed a partnership with Gaia to gather together small growers and people that want to grow grains, and Katie Hastings and myself and others, we formed what's called COMBINI, which means our grains. So we can share grain and share knowledge together. This we started off about 4 years ago, when we had 14 landrace varieties of oats from IBA that was in a seed bank there. And really, we only started with about a handful of grains from each one of these. So we planted, there was, in the beginning, there was about 3 to 4 of us who did this. Now we've grown into 9 on our 3rd year, bulking up this seed. And we're going to look at the quality of the varieties. As you can see, a lot of them are, well, with ancient names that go back quite a long way, like Hen Gardi, which means old Cardiganshire. These we planted in plots by hand, and we did them meticulously. There you can see us planting them there with my grandchildren and my volunteers in plots. We had to plant them by hand gradually and put them in small rows. And it was so nice to see those actually coming to grain and coming to harvest. And as you can see there, they were planted in rows, and we would harvest them by hand, and then we would store them. And we had a 1 day up with Owen Evans in Taherzadeh, and we had a threshing day. The threshing machine used there is an old Swedish machine, and a small machine, because that's what we used to use to extract the grain from the straw back 50, 60 years ago. And this was a common thing then, because my father used to be a contractor in the area with 2 threshing machines, and he used to cover the area through the winter, threshing the grain off the straw for farmers, so that they'd have the grain to feed their animals through the winter and into the spring. The seeds we had from the trial plots, we were thrashed them with Kate at Real Seeds. This is a German machine, I believe, I could be wrong, but this was really ideal for the small quantities of grain we had. And having these bunches, these small sheaves of grain, passing it through this machine, it really did an ideal job. And we were very fortunate to have Kate, lending the machine and giving us her time. Also on the farm, we've done EIP trials, European Initiative Project, where it was one of my ideas. I was lucky enough to have ADAS and European funding interested in doing these trials, where we grew ancient varieties alongside a modern variety to compare growth, yield, and as well to really see which ones were, because I was interested in very much in their performance compared to modern varieties, because modern varieties have been grown, and really the plant breeding has been done to make them small in growth, less straw, so you wouldn't have the crop falling over. In September, I visited a farmer friend of mine who I visited 8 years ago, and I went to revisit him again when I was in Poland in September. He grows ancient grains as well. He collects old machinery, and the way he set it up now, since I was there previously, he can grade it from a grain, to dehull it, to clean it, to polish it, and to mill it, and he sells the flour from his farm. And the machinery he's got there now would be ideal for what we want today. It's so much is needed, like Tony was mentioning. This machine that I'm showing you at the moment now is something I've never seen before. It's a grading table, and the grain lands on the table. It vibrates at an angle. You can adjust the angle, and it adjusts, the grain falls into its grading on the end by size and weight. And it's quite ingenious how this was created.
If you just want to round off, Gerald, as well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm on my final photo. This is a photo of one and only photo I've got of us actually harvesting at our farm. And to me, this is where I want us to go in full circle. I'm not saying going back to harvesting by sheaves, but as you see the stack, my father's on the stack building the stack, and that was the way they stored the grain. In front of the house, you've got a van. That was before supermarkets, when the grocer used to come round with a van every Thursday and you bought what you wanted. A lot of things we've lost, a lot of things we can learn from the past, but we need to share and work together. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gerald. And we'll just stop the sharing. Great. Yeah, and I've also been to Gerald's farm, and it's a real inspiration. And we heard a lot more about Claverny on our farm tour, and about how they've managed to bring in a lot of also vintage machinery to do this process of working with grains at a scale that makes sense for them. So the last presentation that we have, before we move on to some questions, and I see we've already got a couple of questions in the chat, is Anne Owen. So Anne is a veg grower in Machynlleth, which is in Midwest Wales, and is part of the cooperative Mac Veg Box scheme, which is part of Mac Mythlon. So Anne's going to talk about how cooperation in Mac Mythlon allows growers to access the market by bringing together their production in one veg box and work together to also run a market stall. So it's a very different approach to cooperation to the two that we've heard so far, and hopefully a lot of interesting examples to give you. Off you go, Anne.
Thank you, and well done everybody who's still here with us. So I'm mainly going to be talking not about machines, but about people and how we manage to work together. So as you probably know, most growers and small-time farmers, we are quite rugged individualists. So it's sometimes quite a challenge to get us all to agree on stuff, but we have been doing so quite successfully for about 6-7 years now. So we run a veg bag scheme that actually incorporates, at the moment, 4 different holdings. It used to be 6. And we work together to fill those bags on a weekly basis of Obviously, we're all small scale, so in winter we have to buy in wholesale. But in the summer, we have quite a while where the veg bags are completely filled with 8 portions of completely locally produced food, which is very fresh because it literally gets picked the day before it goes into the bags. Now, the main aim of my veg box is to pay the growers a decent income, because this is a real issue. If you are growing vegetables on a small scale, you're almost doing it for the love of it, because there really isn't a lot of money in it and barely an income. Myself, we have a very small holding, a very small market garden of about 2/3 of an acre. We are in receipt of full benefits, housing benefit, tax credits, because even though we work 60, 70 hours a week, we cannot make a living of doing this. So that was another consideration for us all to work together, is that in a small place like Machantlev, it didn't make any sense of actually starting to compete with each other. And apart from the fact that it helps us give a better offering to the customers, more variety and often better quality of veg, it also gives us a lot of mutual support. We've used tools together, we've exchanged tools a little bit, not as much as we could or should do, but we're working on that to have more of that in the future. Now in Machantlev, there's also another organization called Fresh and Local, and that's a cooperative market stall. Most of our growers also supply the market stall. And that's again a very interesting model, where basically if you produce it locally or you make it locally, you can become a member and you can sell your produce on the market stall. We have a rota, so you don't have to be on the market stall every week, which is very useful in summer because time is precious and daylight is precious in summer. So it all helps at making marginal enterprises more successful. Now, we also have compiled a Dovey Valley growers price list, and that is quite novel as well. So we've roughly agreed on the prices that all the growers, all the local growers, both for Fresh and Local and for the box scheme, the kind of prices that we will be charging. It means it limits the amount of undercutting that happens. And also when new entrants come in, when new growers come in, they have a bit of a guide as to what the going price is for certain veg. For my veg box, the beauty is that the growers receive a retail price for their produce, not a wholesale price like most veg box schemes do. And this was very important for us because of our holdings being so small. We needed to be able to have a retail price in order to make it viable. So what are the challenges of working cooperatively? Well, you have to agree on who's growing what. And before COVID, we used to have very long protracted meetings where we tossed the ball backwards and forwards, trying to make it fair. You know, everybody wants to grow salad leaves because that's a good earner. Everybody wants to grow chard tomatoes if they've got polytunnels. So we had to divide up between us who was growing what. And there was a fair bit of give and take. And also sometimes crops failed, so it didn't always work out completely. But because we didn't just concentrate on the veg bag scheme, although being our main source of income, we also had the market stall. So everybody grew more than they agreed for the veg box scheme. So there was always a surplus from somebody else that could be used if a crop failed for somebody. Since COVID, that all went out of the window a little bit because we just tried to produce as much as we could. And apart from a pumpkin glut, we were able to sell all our produce. There was virtually no waste. Because there was such a scarcity of fresh veg at certain points. In Machantlev, we're at the end of a supply line. So if there's any kind of hiccups in the logistics of delivery of food and other products, we're the first ones to know about it. We're the first ones to see the empty shelves. So people switched quite wholesale to our veg bag scheme. We basically increased in size by 1/3. Which was quite a challenge. going forward, the challenges that we have is to find a permanent base. So at the moment we are operating from out a community center, a big room there, but this is shared with other people and other organizations. It's also not ideal for storing any veg there. We use it as somewhere to pack. But then there's a lot of traveling backwards and forwards with bags of veg as they go to another place where the customers pick those bags up from. And also we have to do a lot of backwards and forwards with vegetables when they get delivered. And we are hoping that we can actually move to somewhere a bit more permanent, like a big garage, of which there are a couple available in Huntcliffe. But we'll have to wait and see if we're successfully renting those. And I think that's pretty much me. If you have any questions, I look forward to them.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. So we've got 15 minutes left for some questions, and there's two really interesting questions in the chat that I want to come to. Three now. So I think firstly, going to this question of sharing equipment, and so someone asked, how will it work sharing equipment if everyone wants to harvest their crop at the same time due to ideal weather conditions? And I know this is something that came up several times in our conversations, and how to manage that, including transporting things. So perhaps if Chris and Tony would like to answer this quickly. Chris?
Hello. Yeah, in terms of harvesting, I think the harvesting for us isn't such much of an issue, but I think harvesters are quite to a penny. There's a lot of machines around with a lot of capacity sitting around. I think it's handling that product and drying it, and then cleaning it and dehulling it and grading it and whatever you need to do to destone it. That is something we can do with us because we've got the capacity. So the harvest timing doesn't really alter it that much because we have the storage. So, I mean, we're grading and handling about 1,200, 1,500 tons for the farm as it is. It's being able to organize to put it through the system. So for us, and hopefully we can offer that then to our partners and cooperatives around, that we will not have an issue as long as we can bring all the products together so that we're not doing sort of a quarter of a ton at a time where we can maybe do 10 or 20 people's stuff one certain day. We could definitely manage that.
Great, thanks, Chris. Tony, do you have anything to add?
I do. The first thing I want to say is actually, have we got anybody on the call who's part of a machinery rig? Because machinery rigs do this kind of stuff for a living. They develop the sort of machinery, the framework for machinery work, sharing over many, many years. I mean, one of the approaches is to essentially say, okay, we're in this for the long term. Priority, rotate priority over years. Usually, I think they agree within the group the sort of rules and the approach for setting priorities. But I think the key thing, as I understand from machinery rings, is to have the system and the criteria for prioritization, whatever they may be, clear at the beginning.
Great, thanks a lot, Tony. And then going on to this next question of how could this principle of cooperation, because we focused on horticulture and arable, how could it work for other farming sectors, i.e. dairy, red meat and poultry? And just to kind of initially start, I've posted in the chat the kind of initial starting point from my end of this investigation into co-ops was a report for the Wales Cooperative Party. And in that we spoke to a dairy co-op in Wales, which is Calon Wen, and I can post that in the chat in a moment. And so in terms of dairy, they deal a lot with the transport of, because you need like some very specific transport. And I think they were even talking about the possibility of future getting electrified transport and going around and collecting all of the milk from their producers, as well as like the marketing and the standards. And then there was also Wales beef and lamb producers, which is more of a quality assurance scheme, and that's a cooperative as well. So those are two just off my own knowledge. Tony and perhaps Gerald, would you like to answer this question?
I will, but Anne had her hand up there for a moment, so.
Yeah, I wanted to just add that we have got a small dairy farmer and a baker, an artisanal baker, and a local florist, all piggybacking our distribution system. So that's one way you can work together.
So joining together multiple sectors in one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Gerald?
Yeah, also we have a company from England that comes round with a lorry, and he grades the grain and cleans it. So that's another possibility. We can actually make a mobile machine that goes round doing these things and getting it together, either creating cooperative points. You see, in France, there's a lot of farmers have set up a lot of cooperatives. Why can't we do it in Wales? It only needs the initiative and the funding to do it, to share things together. Because, for instance, we depend on contractors to combine the actual crop of cereal, because what's the point of buying a machine that's about 15 to, well, 100,000 could be, and only using it for about 3 or 4 days in the year. So it's a matter of working together, and getting funding. That's the priority.
Yeah, and I think you're probably referring to l'Atelier Paysan in France, which I know some people have been over to visit, which is a farmers cooperating around machinery sharing in France. Gerald, did you want to add anything about how cooperation, this kind of cooperation can work in other sectors like dairy and red meat? Oh, sorry.
No, I had nothing else to add. Actually, I would like to know the cooperative in France, because I think that models like that we should actually learn from. Thank you.
I've put the link in the chat, l'Atelier Paysan.
Thanks.
And I think we've also given this example in the original report that we did. And Tony, do you want to speak to that question?
Yeah, I think I just want to say that quite often with livestock, from my experiences, that cooperation is quite often involved, is linked to the marketing system. So, for instance, I've been working quite closely with a company called Piper's Farm down in Devon, and they're speaking tomorrow in the processing workshop if you want to find out more about them. But they work with a group of 40 local beef, sheep, lamb and pig producers. And that structure of all supplying into the Piper's Farm butchery provides the mechanism that enables them to link up their producer, their individual producers. So they have the mechanism, the communication systems. They're also managing the supply chain, so they know exactly who's producing what, who needs what, when. So as Alice said, in the context of Callum Webb, I think the sort of joint marketing provides the structure and the opportunity to share resources downstream.
Thanks a lot, Tony. And Chris, I don't know if you had anything to add in other sectors.
I think there's another question sitting in Q&A I'd quite like to add a comment to. I think there's a comment about thinking of starting up a small veg unit.
Great. Yeah, I was going to hand that one to Anne, but if you want to speak to it as well, then
I would. Can I answer that one?
Yeah.
Can I just grab in, because we had to face this. We decided to start growing some veg, and it was quite a shock because we used to do supermarkets years ago and grow about 400 odd acres of vegetables. So we've come back in to do the veg thing. I think the problem is as Anne was saying, trying to make money out of it was very hard, especially when you start the story. The reason we managed to make money out of it is that we did all our pumpkins and pre-sold our pumpkins for Halloween. And that has basically covered us while we get established on the veg side. But it is a nightmare to set it up from scratch and cover that cost unless you're cooperating, unless you're borrowing machinery, And that has definitely been a very hard lesson, I think. And hopefully it'll get easier. But also is to make sure you get the true value for your products locally, and you're selling quality locally, regionally, as opposed to stuff that's traveled halfway around the world or from the other side of the country. So I think all these things. So to Sam, I think, who asked the question, think long and hard and get your markets done beforehand, and don't be a price taker. That's easier said than done.
Thanks. And Anne, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I definitely echo the statement, don't be a price taker. You know, vegetables are just ridiculously cheap, and you cannot sell at the same price as Lidl or another supermarket. You know, if you're going to do that, you're going to work yourself into the ground, and you're going to give up, which is, you know, what 2 of our original growers did, because it's just too hard. The other bit of advice I'd say is don't try and grow everything, you know, because already the more you diversify, the more layers of complexity you add to your setup. And the more things, the more skills you need to do, the more actions you need to do every day. So don't try and grow 20 different varieties of veg from the start, because you're just going to burn out. You know, you also maybe don't know yet what the land grows well. Experiment a little, but maybe focus on 6 to 10 crops that, you know that you've got a market for, and you know that aren't terribly time consuming, and grow from there. Take it steady. Don't burn out.
Great, thanks a lot, Anne. And I'm going to suggest that the question from Philip Cadner, which is, do you know people in Cornwall who are either interested or already active in setting up a co-op such as yours in Wales, is answered in the chat instead, if anyone does have any advice. So we've only got 5 minutes left. So I thought it'd be nice to round it off by thinking about what are some of the kind of opportunities and the things we would want to have in order to foster cooperation in Wales. And in the report that I shared, we addressed this in terms of setting up cooperatives, as in the cooperative business model, but less on cooperation between businesses to support machinery access, routes to market, etc. So I'd really like to hear just really briefly from each panelist on what needs to change in the Welsh political context to support cooperation. So just one thing.
Okay.
Who wants to go first? Anne? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they need to recognize that small scale has a place, you know, because we've never qualified for any kind of funding or any kind of grants or any kind of agricultural grants, because we were just a small scale, and that counts for most of our growers as well. But together we do make a serious impact. We do bring quite a lot of food to the market, and I think that should be recognized. And then you're going to see more cooperation.
Thanks, Anne. Gerald?
Yeah, well, with my experience of forming a CSA on the farm, it's one of the best things we've ever done. Why can't we form a CSA on cereals? We've got to look at local and keep it local and keep it small. Going back to, okay, cottage industry. When we want a part now for a machine, we've got to go to our local dealer. That comes from China. When I remember 30 years ago, I could go to a local engineer and he could make it for me within a day. We've got to pool our resources and go back to a cooperative like a CSA theme and create a circular economy. Turn your back on the rest and create your own.
Thanks, Gerald. Chris?
Yeah, I suppose I have a slightly different view. I think it has to be cooperation, and we all have to work together. I think the rules of cooperation have to be clear. I think I'd love nothing more than to support local growers who could feed in to us, or we could help, because it also minimizes the cost of what we're doing. So I think, yeah, I agree with both of the previous speakers, but I think in terms of it, I think the government has to recognize that the small grower must get support, and that support must be given so that they can actually create an income in the countryside and stops the countryside sort of losing all its people. But at the same token, it can supply local product to local areas.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And Tony, finally.
Infrastructure for me, so a prioritization for financial support for building the bricks and mortar and the machines and the processing kit that we need, and a planning system that actually not only enables but actively encourages the development of the infrastructure that we need in order to set up these local resilient food systems that we also desperately need. Thanks so much, Tony. And I'm gonna also refer to a program that I'm working on in England, in fact, which is Your Farming Future, which I'm posting in the chat, because cooperation has come up a lot in how we create resilient farm businesses, and actually quite a desire now from larger farmers to work together with new entrants, recognizing that you can't make a resilient business with multiple enterprises just on your own, because there's just not enough time and developing skills to work on different enterprises. So there's so many different ways to cooperate, and I hope we've shown you some interesting examples from Wales that will inspire you, and I've certainly enjoyed listening to all the speakers. So thank you so much to all of our speakers, and Gerald, Chris and Tony, and thank you to everyone for joining us here for the session today.